The following is meant for entertainment and educational purposes. It is not meant to establish a doctor-patient relationship. Please consult your mental health provider for your mental health needs. Hello, welcome to Chez Eric, my home where we talk about psychiatry and religion with a focus on how to apply it to your life. I am Dr. Eric. I'm a psychiatrist who happens to be religious, and I'm trying to create this space where we can talk about psychiatry and religion to enrich your life. This series is the William James series where we're talking about the Varieties of Religious Experience, very famous text about the varieties of religious experience. And we'll be continuing our discussion about conversion, where lecture 10, conversion concluded, where William James goes deeper into the conversion process and kind of demonstrates what is the role of conversion in our understanding of the religious experience. Last time we discussed about the difference between cataclysmic, crises-related conversions and gradual conversions. And the final conclusion was that William James says, hey, it doesn't matter which one it is. One isn't better than the other. And, it's really about the fruits and how meaningful it is for you. So that's where it left off. But today, I wanted to discuss another aspect of what William James talked about, which is why some people would be more likely to have a cataclysmic version of conversion versus a more gradual version of conversion. And so this also goes back down to the themes we've been talking about in terms of the subconscious self. That in the conversion process, there is a subconscious thing that's going on. And James would say that when you have more of a subconscious process, you're more likely to have a cataclysmic sort of very dramatic conversion versus someone who's less inclined for the subconscious, and they might just be more, gradual overall. And so, just as a refresher, just because the subconscious exists doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. Just because the subconscious sort of world exists doesn't mean God exists. There is a temptation to say, because I can explain your religious experience with subconscious mechanisms, therefore God doesn't exist. However, James would say, no, we might have 5 senses to understand our physical world, and therefore we will also have the subconscious space to understand the spiritual world. And that's how he would kind of explain the role of subconscious in this conversion process. But just to reiterate, James is saying that the difference between a cataclysmic conversion and a gradual conversion is really a question of how much one is inclined to the subliminal space, to the subconscious space. And that's a fairly interesting way of looking at it. If you're not convinced of this, William James kind of goes deeper with an example of this sort of phenomenon. It's a French Protestant, I think I'm pronouncing your name right, Adolphe Monod. He was a dude, and he basically was sad, and then he made the following statement: I had then no resource to save, I had then no resource, save some influence from without. And then afterward, he got better. You can look at the example in the lecture series on your own. It's pretty interesting. And so this individual with the example there, he had some sort of sadness, and then from outside, something came in that he felt, and then, made him better. And we could argue whether this was a subconscious thing versus God actually interacting with him, but this is the reason why he converted. This is the reason why he believes in God. And so, as we briefly talked about the sick soul many times, it is impossible for someone who has sadness in their consciousness to ignore evil. But then when this extreme sadness just disappears out of thin air, that's kind of a gift. And the religious doctrinal explanation of this is that the more lost you are, the more you are the very being that for Christians that Christ wanted to save, right? And then this is sort of the nature of faith. And then, William James talks a little bit about faith here, but that's not the focus of this particular segment. It's this idea that you can simply go from sadness to joyfulness through a fairly subliminal, subconscious sort of mechanism that exists. James references Professor Luba's explanation of this conversion process, saying that a joyfulness from sadness can also come from other channels, not just from faith. And explains that faith is where one is in union with all things. James argues that Professor Luba's definition of faith in this space is not really faith, it's more of an assurance rather than faith. And for James, he says that faith is an assurance that one is saved now and forever, on top of the experience of the conversion process. We're not going to go too deep into the idea of faith, but we are going to talk about this dynamic that James is trying to highlight. The central feature about Professor Luba's explanation of this process of going from sad to joyfulness in this conversion process is that there's a loss of worry and a harmony with oneself. And regardless of whatever conditions are actually happening to you. However, James says that you don't need God's grace or salvation or justification to achieve the same peace, right? You can have other methods to do this. The second feature is that there's a sense of perceiving truth that you didn't understand before. But James says, we'll talk more about this in the experience of mysticism later in the lecture. And finally, the third thing is that with the assurance state, there is a perception that the world has changed, right? An appearance of newness, he says, that beautifies every object. However, this is where James says that we begin to see the automatisms where people can be subjectable to certain experiences and revivals, that they might have more of a subconscious space that's going on. And so William James says that when we're trying to use the subconscious space, these experiences are going from sadness to joyfulness in sort of a big dramatic way. He says that this actually doesn't provide very good evidence of the Holy Spirit, of God, right? There's a lot of controversy over that. And he says the reason why it doesn't provide evidence of it because your experience of a conversion process is not very useful for my experiences. Then I didn't experience that experience. Therefore, it can't be very good for my conversion process. However, if you had a very dramatic sort of experience, whether hearing a voice or hearing a presence or just getting an overall feeling, interacting with you, that would be very, very good to help you remember that experience. But it doesn't really provide proof that that itself is not the fruit that you're really looking for. It just helps you sort of understand, it helps you go into the conversion process. It helps you process and handle and interact with your subliminal area, your subconscious. And that is what James is trying to highlight, that when we're talking about this cataclysmic thing, it is not actually the space where we can have a foundation in faith. Faith is something else entirely. It is quite simply just your experience and it's meaningful to you, but it cannot be used for more than just you. And so that's a fairly controversial thing. James said it, not me. Don't get angry with me. But, think about that for a second. Is a cataclysmic sort of experience evidence for someone else to believe in God or to have their own conversion? And, what are your thoughts on the subject? Do like and subscribe. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Hey, how's it going? Check out my new website. It's available now. You can learn more about me. You can also check out some things I'll be offering in the future, webinars, books, and whatnot. It's a fancy website with a lot of moving parts, designed by someone who's very, very talented. So check it out when you get a chance. All right, I'll talk to you later.